Does World of Warcraft have a good story?
Yes, it does, and that's why we're able to make a good movie about it.
Does World of Warcraft...
Warcraft the movie, later titled Warcraft the Beginning and directed by Duncan Jones in 2016, isn't based on World of Warcraft. It's based on the 1994 real-time strategy game Warcraft, Orcs and Humans.
Welcome to the world of Warcraft.
Hollywood doesn't like gambling money on original works. An established audience is always a safer bet, and Blizzard seemed to have gold on their hands with, at the time of the movie's release, 5.8 million active monthly subscribers and their 6th expansion pack Legion about to come out a month later. As Walter Hickey writes in his book, You Are What You Watch, still the primary motivation for a reboot, a sequel, a prequel is financial. The top priority for most producers is not to make a lot of money, but rather not to lose a lot of money. Why adapt this specific story? Why adapt an RTS from 1994 over your more popular MMO from 2004 that is still receiving constant updates? A game that's arguably more known even with people that don't play video games. So why? Why start at the beginning? Why tell this story? Who is this movie even for?
Our challenge was to actually drill down and find a story that would work as a single film, because there's just so much to do with it. So many great characters, so many story arcs.
The most common complaint from both Warcraft fans and people new to the universe is that the pacing is terrible. The issue can be partially blamed on the studio mandating a 2-hour runtime, forcing director Duncan Jones to cut around 40 minutes of footage. But let's face it, there's still too much happening in this movie. There are 13 named characters in this movie, some of which only exist to deliver some information.
The Guardian has betrayed us.
Medivh.
Or to make characters sad because son dead. The amount of plot in this 2-hour movie would be enough to fill a decently paced series. Ensemble stories can work, but they need to either establish one character as the main character, or have enough time and space dedicated to develop all of the characters organically. The Lord of the Rings, for instance, works as an ensemble because, depending on your preferred version, we get to spend 9 to 11 hours watching these characters move towards a common goal of destroying Sauron and the Ring, while also giving them each enough time to develop their characters. Getting involved in the Fellowship and later fighting Sauron's armies forces a character like Aragorn to deal with his anxieties surrounding his ancestors' weakness and his own fear of being weak. This is the reason why he starts as a drifter, somebody without any responsibilities, far removed from the responsibilities of a king. In contrast, in Warcraft we only have 2 hours to get to know 13 characters, and even less time with most characters because of one of the design principles of the movie.
Well, there was a pre-existing project that Sam Raimi had been doing, and it was, in my opinion, very human-centric, very alliance-centric. And there was, I think, an approach that, in my opinion, didn't put the orcs in the best light.
Sure.
And as in the game where you could choose which side to be on, I thought it was really important that we made a film which allowed you to be on either side of the conflict, really, and followed through heroes from both sides.
Duncan Jones and Blizzard didn't want to make a movie only focused on the humans' perspective, because that would instantly cast the orcs as the evil antagonists. Warcraft actually tells 2 stories with some overlap and has 2 protagonists.
The orcs world is dying. It's become a desert.
They had no choice but to find another world.
Let me go first.
The leader of the orcs wants ultimate power.
Claim my new world!
On the orc side, Durotan is the most obvious protagonist. He has an actual goal. He wants to save his people. But by going about it recklessly, he actually achieves the opposite. And because we don't spend a lot of time with him, we don't really see his distrust in Gul'dan develop over time. It happens in 3 quick succession scenes. The scene where Blackhand gets sentenced to death actually ends with Durotan telling Gul'dan that he doesn't question him, only for him to instantly change his mind when he holds his green baby. And then again, a scene later, when he tells Ogrim, hey, maybe it's Gul'dan's fault that the land is dying. Humans get to react to the plot happening to them, with a lot of their scenes consisting of them standing around looking at maps, strategizing, and mostly repeating information that we've already heard in more interesting scenes. The main character on the human side, Edwin Lothar, has even less impact on the story. He's just standing around while other characters do stuff. Why is he even in this scene? Who knows? Look, here's Kakar revealing the Fel and Lothar is around. Look, here's Kakar defeating Medivh and the demon, and oh hey, look, Lothar is there. We barely see him react to his son dying, either because he has no reaction or because we don't have time to deal with his reaction. And his killing of the guy who killed his son, it just doesn't really resonate. It's not a moment.
For my son.
Even the decision to go attack the orcs at the gate is not a decision that Lothar makes. It's a decision that King Lane makes. And is he our protagonist? And what do we even know about the king? Well, we know that he's nice. Just nice. He's nice. He trusts everybody immediately. He's nice. There is no clear goal or want on the human side except for the quest that is who is attacking us. But then Garona helpfully comes along and she's like, well, they are orcs. And she also explains why they're doing it. And when they don't know where to find a portal, no problem, there's Garona just showing them the portal. All this is happening. Kakker has his own little side quest that starts with the Dementor-looking character summoning him with the book and ends with him figuring out that Medivh is a traitor. But this is another example of why this movie is edited in a weird way that makes reveals meaningless. Kakker sees Medivh's eyes glowing green and he decides to go to Dalaran to ask the Kirin Tor for help because he believes that Medivh has betrayed the humans. After he asks about Aladai, he's taken to the Glenn Close cube, and then the Glenn Close in the cube tells him, hey, Medivh is a betrayer, which he already knew, and then she tells him a line that he already read in the book that she led him to earlier. And this scene, yeah, it's cool to see Glenn Close, but it tells us nothing new, it tells Kakker nothing new, and the whole Medivh reveal is not shocking, and then in the next scene we get another double down on the Medivh as a betrayer reveal. The split narrative, while cool and balanced in anything with a longer runtime, ruins the opportunity to get to know or even care about any of these characters. Instead of character moments progressing the story, we get a lot of dialogue and shorthand. Durotan is often called a great leader by people like Garona.
And he is loved by his clan. He's a strong chieftain.
But we never see him interact with any of the other Frostwolves outside of Draka and Ogrim. He's the same orc from the beginning to the end of the movie. His only notable action is getting suspicious of Gul'dan and betraying him, which spectacularly backfires. His goal was to save his people, and now everyone is dead. Split narrative also ruins a lot of mystery in the plot. With the breakneck pacing of information, jumping back and forth, we also get a lot of repeated information. Something that is said on the orc side will also be said on the human side. Like the scene where Garona goes into the throne room and tells the humans Gul'dan's plan, something we the viewer already know. The back and forth jumping between the sides produces sequences that feel kind of off and make you wonder, how does time even work in this universe? For example, when Durotan's betrayal is found out, he tells Draka she has to take the baby and leave, but they're interrupted by Blackhand arresting him. Draka then just sits back and waits for the plot to happen, I guess, because there are several scenes going back to the humans, then back to the orcs, back to the humans, then back to the orcs, before Ogrim tells her that she needs to go. The constant jumping back and forth between the sides makes it very difficult to know if this happened between minutes or days. Was Draka being silly for sitting in her tent for several hours, or did it happen between a few minutes? We don't know. We also don't have enough time to develop her character, so we have no idea if that decision was something she made consciously. Does this movie work? To me, watching Warcraft is a very frustrating experience because it feels like if they committed to the single perspective, or if they had more time like in a series to develop the characters over time, we would have gotten a better story. I don't think it works as a movie, and certainly not as a standalone story. By the end of the movie, a lot of the plot lines are barely resolved, and it even ends with baby Moses drifting down the river, which feels as obvious sequel bait. The movie does have some redeeming qualities, specifically the CGI is really good. The orcs look amazing. Some of the magic effects in this movie look really cool. And this last scene between Durotan and Gul'dan is really cool, and it's not interrupted by the plot several times. But overall, I can't really recommend this movie. Certainly not to people who don't already love Warcraft. So how does this work as an adaptation?
Did you ever envision when you first started playing that this could ever be a movie, or did you think the world's just too expansive? What do you focus on, and how do you make it a film?
I mean, I think in some ways anything can be a film if there's a good idea as a kernel for it.
Adaptation theory has long focused on two major elements of adaptation. Medium specificity, like in Seymour Chapman's 1980 article, What Novels Can Do That Films Can't, and vice versa, and fidelity to the source, with authors like Thomas Leitch arguing that adaptations are often only judged by how faithful they are, rather than being their own artwork. In his book, Film Adaptations and Its Discontents, Leitch argues that historically, novels had more authority than the lowbrow film adaptation. But for audiences and adaptation theorists, being faithful to the more superior book was always the goal. It's the old "the book was better" argument. While it's true that not all media are the same, the medium-specific argument is less used as a way to describe why film has to adapt their source material to fit their medium, and more as a way to describe why film can never achieve the holy grail of adaptation. Of course it's going to be shit, it doesn't have any means for description like the more superior novel does. In terms of video game adaptations, the difference between a video game and a movie boils down to what the audience is doing, playing versus watching, forcing the narrative as one of the only points of comparison. But, as Thomas Leitch writes in his article 12 Fallacies in Contemporary Adaptation Theory, like translations to a new language, adaptations will always reveal their source's superiority, because whatever their faults, the source text will always be better at being themselves. Every piece of media, every media text, implicitly or explicitly, even if it's not an adaptation, refers to other texts. Every piece of media is therefore an intertext. In other words, no piece of media is released in a vacuum, always carrying with it the cultural context of what came before and the time of its release. Chris Metzen, longtime creative director of the Warcraft series and current executive creative lead on World of Warcraft, grew up as a big fan of Dungeons & Dragons, which is also influenced by the granddaddy of all fantasy, Tolkien. So Warcraft the movie isn't only related to its source material, the Warcraft RTS from 1994, but it's also intertextually linked to Dungeons & Dragons, Lord of the Rings, World of Warcraft, and any other fantasy text that existed at the time of the movie's release. In a way, you could also argue that World of Warcraft is an adaptation of the original RTS games. A lot of events from the RTS games inform World of Warcraft's narrative, and you can find in-game references to the original stories through books or through time travel dungeons like the Black Morass, in which you find yourself in another universe where you have to help Medivh in opening the portal.
The time has come! Gul'dan, order your warlocks to double their efforts!
World of Warcraft isn't just a game, it's a world. It's an online theme park where players can do a whole range of things. It's another genre from the RTS, it's arguably another medium, and events from the story have to adapt to fit this constantly changing world. Metzen himself apologized in 2006 for making changes to the Drenai backstory when they got introduced as a playable race. In a letter to fans he writes, "I think it's important to note that world building is far bigger than just storytelling, and it requires, in my humble opinion, a certain amount of flexibility. Sometimes you need to expand certain ideas or retcon whole section of continuity to broaden the scope and accessibility of your setting. Even during the RTS era of the series, changes had to be made to the story to keep a coherent whole."
The other thing I think is really interesting when you look at kind of the history of where Warcraft started was those games actually told parallel stories.
Oh yeah.
You know, so
the series, yeah, especially the RTS series, had always been very binary, right? You play the human campaign, you can play the orc campaign, and in those early games, they were kind of contiguous, right? So we had to decide, as we started Warcraft 2, who won? Warcraft 1, right? Well, you know, the orcs kind of got the better from that time, and we had to kind of fudge the continuity as it went because they were really built to be one or the other. So
the movie also makes changes to the lore, which reduces the amount of characters and backstory required, which is great in an already bloated movie, but they also change some details to bring it more in line with World of Warcraft than Warcraft. I can sit here and nitpick the choices made, like how King Lane refers to this lush and green area as Deadwind Pass way before it becomes dead in the movie, or how Dalaran is already a floating city, even though that doesn't happen in the game's canon until way later. Interestingly, the reverse has also happened, where the King Lane model in the Return to Karazhan dungeon has been updated to feature the sword from the movie rather than the generic two-handed weapon that he had in the original raid. Going back to the movie and how it works as an adaptation, I think it's more constructive to focus on a single choice that made the movie very faithful to the source material, but heard it as a standalone story. The choice for the split narrative is very faithful to the source material in balancing both sides of the story, but it also hurts the lore in having to cut corners to fit a 2-hour movie. Just imagine the type of movie we could have gotten if we just focused on the orcs for 2 hours. Wait, why did they even adapt this story? The plot of the movie wasn't set in stone when Blizzard and Legendary entered into an agreement in 2006. In the announcement, John Jasny, Chief Creative Officer of Legendary Pictures, said, "It's not always the case that interactive game properties lend themselves to proper adaptation to film. We are intending to approach this as we would the adaptation of a best-selling novel. respect the essence of all that it is, but also build upon the fertile base while translating it into a new medium. At the second ever BlizzCon in 2007, Blizzard executives revealed that the original plan for the movie was a first contact story between orcs and humans. Sound familiar? But Chris Metzen said that it was too similar to Lord of the Rings, which had only wrapped 4 years earlier. But also, and more crucially to our quest today, he said that the Warcraft universe had its popularity more due to World of Warcraft than to the original RTS games. Duncan Jones was hired in 2013 after sending his vision on the Warcraft movie or movies to Blizzard. He also agreed with Blizzard executives that they needed to start from the first context story, the beginning. In an interview he said, "From the moment I first talked to Blizzard, the plan was to start our film with the first time orcs met humans. First contact. I think that for a world with so much newness to explain, this was a wise choice, especially when so many people in our audience may not know anything about Warcraft. It was important that some of our characters would be seeing the world fresh as well, and that the audience could see the situation through their eyes." Jones wanted the movie to feature first contact between the orcs and the humans, which the audience gets to experience from both sides, because starting a story at the beginning is always the right choice, right? Personally, I have a lot of issues with Warcraft. I have played some Warcraft RTS games in the past, but that was in the 90s. I've mostly played World of Warcraft, and while I'm familiar with some characters, the release date being between Warlords of Draenor and Legion coming out was confusing to say the least. The story of Warlords of Draenor is an alternative timeline take on the events of the Dark Portal, where the orcs refuse to take the Fel, and Gul'dan then becomes the major antagonist for the rest of the story up until the start of Legion, before he dies in the Nighthold raid. If you played as Horde during Warlords of Draenor, which I did at the time, a lot of the storyline involves the Frostwolves, and you even meet Durotan several times. Furthering my confusion were the cross-promotions between World of Warcraft and the movie. Blizzard wasn't handing out free copies of Warcraft 1 or the Battle Chest, they were handing out free copies of World of Warcraft and free game time with your movie ticket. World of Warcraft players even got in-game cosmetic items that looked like weapons from the movie if they logged in a few months surrounding the movie's theatrical release. Alliance players got the shield and sword that Lane used in the movie, and Horde players got Gul'dan's staff. During the movie's marketing, it didn't really become obvious that this was an adaptation of Warcraft the RTS rather than Warcraft, the massively multiplayer online role-playing game. The popularity of World of Warcraft and people's loyalty to their chosen factions, however, could be another reason for the split narrative. When early reports claimed Sam Raimi's movies was going to be from the Alliance perspective, a lot of longtime Horde players were disappointed. So who's this movie for? People online seem to be split between saying the movie is too faithful to the original and only works for Warcraft fans, or other people saying it's not even faithful enough. By trying to start at the very beginning and including as much as possible for newer audiences, while also trying to balance a split narrative that gives equal time to both fans of the Alliance and the Horde, Duncan Jones have basically made a movie for everyone, but also a movie for nobody. There's no time to really connect to any of the characters or events happening, and any connection that a fan might have to the characters and the events happening are more based in their unrelated game universe version. What remains is a 2-hour movie of humans looking at maps while orcs fight each other. Blizzard has been hiring Hurricane lately to make these cool trailers for the classic expansion trailers and also patch releases. One of the best videos that captures the Warcraft vibe, in my opinion, is Hurricane's dramatization of Guzu's death in Hardcore. In case you haven't seen the original clip, Guzu, a Twitch streamer, was playing Hardcore Classic, a mode where if your character dies, it gets deleted, and he decided to show his audience a mouse mat, not noticing that his character then got tail swept by a dragon, fell into a hole, and he fell to his death, which meant Guzu lost his level 52 character. Hurricane then made a beautiful animation which captures the way it feels to play World of Warcraft, the way the combat feels, the sounds, the goofiness, the added damage meter. Warcraft, if it ever gets adapted again, deserves an adaptation that's more in line with the way it feels to be in the World of Warcraft, to be in Azeroth. It is the reason why a lot of people, me included, still play the game 18 to 20 years later. Sure, the movie isn't totally bad, but it doesn't fully lean into what makes Warcraft Warcraft. Warcraft isn't Lord of the Rings, it isn't Game of Thrones, it's goofy, it's wacky, it uses a lot of references to popular culture, it uses humor, it doesn't take itself seriously. So if we ever get another adaptation of Warcraft, I hope they focus on what makes them strong, on world building, on being in Azeroth, rather than telling a specific story from the Azeroth lore. Basically, I'm saying I hope they make Arcane, but for Warcraft. Thanks for watching.